the legend. We're talking about the war in Iran. The Iran regime is a death cult. Let me repeat this. Iran regime is a death cult. They are suicidal, homicidal. This is similar to Nazi Germany, particularly near the end of World War II. Now we're near the end of the Iranian regime. I'll explain more of this later. The Iranians are getting erratic with their missiles and drones. They're hitting Arab states, Gulf states, not a whole lot towards Israel. They've also attacked Azerbaijan, the country to the north of them. Now look, 7 presidents have failed to deal effectively with Iran, going all the way back to 1979. The Iranians, the regime, still want a nuclear weapon. They still want large-scale missile and drones. They're making them. President Carter, President Reagan, although Reagan got our hostages back on January 20th, 1981. Bush the Elder, Clinton, Bush number 2, Obama, Biden. They negotiated, they imposed sanctions, they gave them money to go away, they did everything possible. And the 7 previous presidents failed, going all the way back again till 1979. So, what's going on now? Now Israel is using a policy they used against Hezbollah. They killed the Ayatollah, they killed their leadership, and now they're killing their replacements. I call it whack-a-mole. And whoever's going to be in charge next, they're gonna whack them. So eventually the last man standing is going to be completely paranoid, and he's going to want to hide out. But there's going to be no place to hide. So if you cut off the head of the snake, you're going to destroy the regime and the dictatorship. Now, of course, there's critics. There's always critics. No endless wars. No boots on the ground. Somehow Israel tricked Trump. Not our war. Now, you got to understand, this is only the first week. You have to wait for results in the end. It's not going to be a forever war. The United States government leadership knows more than the average person. They know much more about what's going on. Much more than the critics. We're talking about the President, the Vice President, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, National Security Council, Joint Chiefs of Staff. I don't know all the facts. I'm doing the best I can. As an attorney, I always wanted to get as many facts as possible before I reached an opinion. So the critics don't have all the facts. That's a fact. Oh, somehow Israel tricked Trump and everyone associated with them. This is nonsense. If we didn't take out Iran's nuclear capability, my question to the critics is, then what? What are we supposed to do with Iran? Because they want a nuclear weapon. And in order to use the nuclear weapon, there's basically 2 ways that they would do it. One, they would acquire what is called an ICBM, a ballistic missile. They could get it from Russia. They could get it from China. They could get it from North Korea. They would mount a crude weapon on top of a missile. It could reach Alaska, Hawaii, maybe Guam, maybe our bases in the Philippines or our bases in Japan. Again, it doesn't have to be a sophisticated weapon. We are a bigger target than than Israel. Israel is a very small country and there's a lot of Arabs there. So we would be the most likely candidate for them, for the Iranians, intercontinental ballistic missile. That's an ICBM. I couldn't think of it. So normally you need 2. You need the weapon to be mounted on the the ICBM. And of course, it's possible that they could also mount it on a drone, a long-range drone or ICBM. And again, it doesn't have to be very accurate. It doesn't have to be a sophisticated weapon. We're all thinking that this all has to be sophisticated. It really doesn't. You don't necessarily need to mount a nuclear weapon on an ICBM, even. Let's look at a little history here. We used a nuclear weapon, the United States. We put it on, we had two of them, Nagasaki and Hiroshima. We put it on a plane, two planes, for example, and we dropped two bombs. Now, for those of you not familiar with nuclear weapons, you don't drop it on the ground. You detonate it in the atmosphere, a mile and a half for the greatest effect. So it's conceivable they could get a crude weapon, put it in a plane, like a passenger plane. I'm not giving, hopefully not giving anyone any ideas here, and fly it over some sort of U.S. territory, or even the continental United States. Disguise it simply as a passenger plane, and then have it as a suicide mission, and detonate it in the air. And again, the United States is a big target. So this is possible that this could happen. You have to understand, the ICBMs that they could use, they fly at around 5,000 miles an hour. So you're going to have very little warning. We also have hypersonic missiles. So, in my opinion, the regime is getting desperate. And if they're getting desperate, they're going to try anything that is possible. Fortunately, the United States and Israel have very good intel on the ground in Iran, dealing with dissidents, dealing with minorities. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So it is possible that when this ends, that Iran, or we're talking about the people there who I like to call the Persians have a potential to become a democracy, because the Persians have a long history. They speak Farsi. They are not an Arab country. So it's possible. We don't know what's going to happen in the end. But anyway, we cannot let Iran be ruled by fanatics. And they're becoming homicidal and suicidal. In January 8th and 9th, 2026, it is estimated that they murdered over 36,000 demonstrators, slaughtered them in the streets. The source for this that I have is the Iran Intel editorial board. It could have been more, it could have been less. So they're getting desperate. So why are they getting desperate? They're getting desperate because now it's possible that the leaders, or whoever's going to be the leaders, they're going to be accountable. That if there's a regime change, the new regime is going to make the old regime accountable. And the present regime crossed the red line. They become desperate. They become homicidal, suicidal. Just the fact that they all want to die, and they're going to take as many people as possible with them. And I would like to compare the present regime, the death cult in Iran, to the development historically of the Nazi Party in Germany, officially known as NSDAP, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, that existed from July of 1921 to the end of the war, World War II, May 8, 1945. as the war, World War II in Europe neared the end, the regime in Germany became more desperate, just like the regime in Iran. They accelerated the killing. In addition, they were running out of soldiers. They were using teenage boys and old men. They unnecessarily fought the Battle of Berlin, where over 100,000 people died. And the killing increased at the concentration camps and the death camps. I'll talk about that in a minute or two. Now I want to talk about, relate the use of ballistic missiles in Iran to the development of all countries, Nazi Germany. They were the first ones to have ballistic missiles. It was used as a weapon of terror. Sound familiar? History repeats itself. This was called the V-2 rocket, a ballistic missile. It traveled at 3,400 miles per hour. Sound familiar? It could reach an altitude of 60 miles. That's space. It had a range of 200 miles. And it had a warhead of 2,000 pounds of explosives. The German regime made 6,000 of these. The weapon was 27,000 pounds, and I've seen pictures of it. It was 45 feet high. It was scary looking. You can go on the internet and look. V-2 rocket. It was a weapon of terror used at the end of the war because the regime in Germany got desperate. They used it to attack Antwerp, Belgium. And they killed 1,736 people and wounded 4,500. More importantly, they attacked London, killed 2,754 people, and 6,523 people were injured. Since this weapon traveled so fast, it was silent. You didn't hear it coming, and there was absolutely no defense to it. And again, it occurred at the end of World War II. They started using it in October of 44 up to March of 45. I mean, this was like almost the end of the war. I mean, by October of 44, the war was winding down. This was desperation. This was a terror weapon. And again, the war ended on May 8, 1945, when the regime surrendered. End of war in Europe. So I'm looking at the parallels again. The parallels are that the regime in Iran is getting desperate. They're killing more people. Same thing that took place in Nazi Germany, using ballistic missiles as weapons of terror. Same thing that the Germans did. And the Iranians, the regime, the people there, they got to be thinking that if they're out, there's going to be accountability. And I think the same thing took place in Germany towards the end of the war. They became homicidal and suicidal because they knew there was going to be accountability, which there was. As I mentioned before, near the end of the war, the killings increased. What you had in Germany is about 300 concentration camps. So they started emptying out the concentration camps because they want to hide what they were doing. So they took the people, the inmates, or whatever you want to call them, and they forced them to walk in the winter for weeks. This was the coldest winter in Europe in 100 years. Without food, without water, and there was massive deaths. It's estimated up to 400,000 people. These people survived the concentration camps, but they died on the death marches. And the purpose of the death marches was to hide the conditions in the camps, hide the evidence, so they wouldn't be accountable. And then what they did at the end of the war, towards the end of the war, they started taking more people to the death camps. There's a difference now, I know, in degree. The concentration camps were located in Germany. but the death camps were located in Poland. And the purpose of the death camps, primarily in Poland, was for the liquidation of the Jews. So towards the end of the war, the guy that was in charge of transportation to the death camps in Poland, at this point, towards the end of the war, the only one in operation was Auschwitz. The war's almost over. And the guy in charge was a guy by the name of Adolf Eichmann. And the war was almost over. He sent 500,000 Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz until the camp was liberated by the Soviets. So they became homicidal and suicidal, and they killed as many people as they possibly could to erase evidence. And it's hard to explain. But there are similarities today to the situation in Iran. And many of their leaders, the Nazi leaders, committed suicide. Hitler, Goebbels, Goering, Himmler. They didn't want to face accountability, and many of the lesser individuals that ran the camps and were responsible, that would have been the SS, many of them committed suicide. And of course, there were trials. Lots of trials after the war. You may have heard of the Nuremberg trials. Took place in Germany. There were also trials in I think there were some trials in France, but there were a lot of trials in Poland and in the Soviet Union. They tried to hide the evidence. They shut down almost all of the death camps and concentration camps, but they couldn't hide everything. So what happened was American soldiers liberated a camp called Ohrdruf. It was a sub-camp of a famous camp called Buchenwald. Ohrdruf was 30 miles west of Buchenwald. It was liberated on April 12, 1945. That was about 3.5 weeks before the end of the war. It was liberated by the 4th Armored Division in the United States and the 89th Infantry Division. And there were thousands of inmates that were still alive and thousands of dead bodies laying all over the place. And eventually, our leaders came, General Eisenhower, General Bradley, General Patton, and they were horrified. And they brought in as many troops as possible to witness what they saw. And they brought in the media, and they took video. You can go on YouTube and see the various YouTube, the liberation of Ohrdruf. That's Ohrdroff. There is another camp that's also on YouTube called Dachau, D-A-C-A-U, outside of Munich. The liberation of that camp. So what Eisenhower did, and he did this for all the camps that were liberated, because he believed that the locals, the local Germans, the citizens, kind of knew what was going on. So since there were so many bodies around, he brought in the local population and he made them bury the people that were the bodies. And he made a record of it. It's in video. Films were taken. Eisenhower specifically wanted films taken so no one would deny what had happened. Nowadays we have Holocaust deniers, or deniers that the Nazis did anything. So you can see these things. So the German regime became desperate, homicidal, suicidal. They knew they were going to be held accountable. The Iranian regime has killed many people in many countries, including thousands of American citizens since 1979. There will definitely be accountability once this regime is gone. I am fairly certain it's going to be gone. I'm not sure how, and I'm not sure how it's going to be replaced, but there's going to be accountability. And I think that's why they're getting so desperate, launching drones and launching ballistic missiles every which way. Will the United States have boots on the ground? Now you got to listen to me clearly. carefully. We may have boots on the ground. I'm going to condition this. If the regime changes and we reopen our embassy, then we may put boots on the ground to guard our embassy. That's when we're going to have boots on the ground. And hopefully that will take place. Look, as I mentioned before, 7 presidents have failed on Iran. 7. So President Trump is looking at this and he's saying, am I going to be the 8th president that fails? Because the regime has not changed. From day one, they are a regime of terror, and they want nuclear weapons, and they want as many drones as missiles as possible. So what do? I mean, what is the alternative? There is no alternative but to get rid of these people. And they don't want to give up so quickly because, again, I've mentioned several times, just like what the Nazis did at the end of World War II, they know there's going to be accountability. There's going to be trials, I predict. Assuming the regime is changed, it has to be. They have to have regime change. And if they have regime change, there's going to be accountability. There's going to be trials. People are going to be held accountable. Like Germany after World War II. It went on for a good number of years. As I mentioned before, a lot of these people associated with the regime in Germany, they didn't want to face the music, so they committed suicide. Rather than be tried, held accountable, and then face the executioner. And many of the individuals after World War II were executed by the United States, by the British, Poland, Soviets, for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and particularly those that ran the death camps and the concentration camps. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. But the end goal here of the current administration is eliminate all possibilities that Iran gets nuclear weapons, destroy their capacity to make any drones and any missiles, and get rid of the regime. You can't do any worse. There's no possibility that you can do any worse. It's been alleged that recently they had the capability of making half a dozen nuclear weapons, as I mentioned before. There's a lot of different ways they could use this weapon or weapons. They could use it as a weapon of terror, for example, in the Middle East, and to blackmail the countries in the region, threaten them with a nuclear attack, and if they don't cooperate, this is what's going to happen to you. I mean, history repeats itself. It's amazing how we see the same things happening. I remember growing up in the aftermath of World War II and seeing all these things that happened after the war and learning about it. And I'm just surprised that other individuals haven't pointed out the parallels in the regimes. The regime in Germany and the regime currently in Iran. They are a death cult. They are homicidal, suicidal, and we're not going to be able to get rid of them unless they either surrender or we kill them all. And whatever leader gets replaced, then he's going to be whacked. Because that's the only way to do it. So, I want to conclude by telling you my website, which is Conversations with Dr. S. the Legend. Here it is again, Conversations with Dr. S. the Legend. And I can be reached through my email. I'm going to put it up for the video people and then read it off for the audio people. By the way, it is Dr. all one word. DrSTheLegend@gmail.com. DrSTheLegend@gmail.com. So this is a video that will be posted on YouTube and on, I believe on Rumble, and you can see the audio portion on, I think it's Spotify and Apple and a whole bunch of others. Also, I want to point out that these beautiful paintings here can be seen, and I'll read this out for the audio people. This is the website for the cowboys and the rodeos and anything else you might see, which is Western scenes. And this is all available. The website, pbensignor.com, p.bensignor.com, p.bensignor.com. So this is Dr. S, the Legend, signing off.